大家早安，阿弥陀佛。那大家的，俺摩推呢，他说的，10年不的嘛，摩推宣言，俺卡桑地个，其大家俺摩推宣言是。
Today we will continue on the explanation of the Heart Sutra.
당부 제빈데 마시 다리 아니 지기 실업님부들이야 당부 미 처시디 미 숨게마도 처시와 말아요. 미 망한자는 삼삼 녀라 침으로 차요도 미 망한자는 녀라 망하로 차. 제가 미 숨게 채브래 미 숨게 되지 갈리야 파르치 장가데 파르치 아니 미 뒤게 하즈지 되지 장가 파르래. 근데 인도산다 참여지 도나시 체제 다 도나 첨부를 체제 지단계 남균에 실험용벌이야 지 가져래 지단계 가버야 되는 섬으로 실험용 도들래 미세기 대명이 되봐 근데 망무시라래 제가 뒤교세 된다 미망무시시대 용벌에 이네들이 아주 최신한 당분들이 망무지야 최신이야
Actually, for today's class, I was thinking that there are only about 300 people. Sometimes I think that if there are too many people coming to the class, there would be quite a number of problems. But I didn't expect that from 300 students, we now have close to 700 students. And I'm very glad and I rejoice in your love and faith in this teaching. But we never expected so many students to attend. And because all of you are so diligent, and especially your interest and faith in such a teaching. And it's also given me quite some stress. Normally, I'm not that disciplined. But this time around, because everyone is so into the class, so I've got to make lots of preparations for it. Now we will continue to talk about the content of the Heart Sutra.
Loma lubju jigi ngene gyage de changse ru chuse de yagoshita mebi inza lubju jigi ngene gyangzu gyage ton chushi ye sambarchi dos dosam shirwana 学生的身份这个出赛水平不好
So please take note that the standard of my Chinese language is still not high. It is just that of a primary school or elementary school level. So you're actually listening to a young student's report. In our lesson yesterday, we talked about the naming of the sutra and have also been given a short introduction on the translator. Now I want to go on to the main text of the sutra. There are 8 parts in the main text. There is the epigraph, causes and conditions, retinue, etc. Yesterday, we have talked about the first three, which is the epigraph, time, and retinue. However, there's one part from yesterday on the story of how Rajagra got its name, the part that came from the great treatise on the perfection of wisdom. It was stated that at that time there was an emperor called Guangche, whose father wanted to sacrifice many animals in a ceremony for the gods. As a result, his body was sent into the ground. Here I made a small mistake. I didn't read the story closely and I made a mistake. So today I need to be punished. So what I said yesterday was that the emperor's father had not wanted to kill, but in actual fact, he had insisted on killing. So the sin of saying the wrong thing is quite big. So the details of this story I'm going to share with you today because they're very interesting. And I can also add a little bit more here. This emperor who insisted on sacrificing animals is called Vasu. He's called Vasu because he was tired of worldly mundane things. He became ordained as a Brahmin. One day, a few ordained Brahmins got into an argument with some lay Brahmins. The lay Brahmins insisted that, according to the sutras, when making sacrifices for the gods, one must kill animals and eat meat. However, the ordained Brahmins believed that in sacrificial ceremonies, one should not kill animals. So just as everyone was in the heat of the argument, the ordained Brahmin said, there is a king who has been ordained to become a Brahmin. You should believe what he has to say about this, shouldn't you? The lay Brahmin said, yes, they believe what he says. So the ordained Brahmin said, okay, then tomorrow we'll go and consult him and let him be the judge. And we'll go together and ask him. But that night, the lay Brahmins, they secretly went to visit the ordained Brahmin, the emperor, Vasu. They discussed many things and told Vasu that tomorrow, during our argument, you must help us. So the next morning, when everybody had arrived in front of Vasu, the ordained Brahma asked him, when we are holding a sacrificial ceremony for the gods, should we kill? Vasu answered, according to the Brahmin's teachings, one should kill during sacrificial ceremonies. When the ordained Brahmins heard it, they were shocked and they continued to ask him. And so they told him, let's not talk about the law first. Just tell us instead what you personally think. So the Vasu replied, my opinion is a sacrificial ceremony for the gods, must of course kill animals. And since these animals are killed as sacrifices to the gods, so after their deaths, they will be reborn into the heaven realm. When the ordained Brahmins heard this, they were infuriated and scolded him. You're wrong, you liar. They even spat at him and said, you sinner, go die. Immediately after they scolded him, Vasu's ankles sank into the ground. because when the ordained Brahmins get angry and scold people, it is quite scary. Then the ordained Brahmins continue to ask him, "You'd better tell me the truth. You'd better tell us the truth. If you lie, your entire body will sink into the ground." And Vasu insisted. He said, "For the sake of the gods, if we sacrifice the animals or eat their meat, it is of course not a crime at all." Right after he said this, his knees sank into the ground. So he sank into the ground right up to his knees. And so, through this process of question and answer, Vasu's entire body has sunk into the ground, and only his head was left above ground. At that time, the sages advised him, "Look, it is clear that you've been lying, and hence you've received such a retribution. So do just tell us the truth." So even though only your head remains above the ground, as long as you tell the truth, we would have a way to save you. At this point, Vasu thought to himself, "I'm a man of high repute. After all, I was a king. So how can I simply take my words back? It'll be so embarrassing." Besides, in the Brahmin teachings, the Vedic Sanskrit texts, they had praised the merit of making sacrifices to the gods many times. So even if I die, I'll still insist on the sacrificing of animals for the gods. So he said this with the last bit of energy and conviction. Sacrificing and the killing of animals is not wrong. It is absolutely not a crime. In the end, the ordained Brahmins were very disappointed, and they said, "There's no hope for you. We don't ever want to see you again." And right after that, Vasu's entire body sank into the ground. He disappeared. And so from that day onwards, all the way to the time of Nagarjuna, everyone went by what Vasu said and made sacrificial killings for the worship of heavenly gods. And when they kill these animals, they will tell the animals who are being killed, "It's Vasu who wants to kill you, not me." So that's the custom, the traditional custom. So don't blame me because it's Vasu who wants you killed. And the rest of the stories that follow are on Vasu's son, Emperor Guangche, and on how he moved the capital of Magadha. So this has already been mentioned in yesterday's class, so I'll not repeat. So the son felt that the place is not that good because his father had sunk in the ground there, so he feels kind of bad about it, and so he moved. Today, I will explain the fourth part, which is causes and conditions, and the fifth part, which is the question. So the content is, at that time, the Bhagavan entered the samadhi called profound light. At that same time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara viewed the practice of profound transcendent wisdom. He viewed the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. This has to do with the causes and conditions. Then we go on to the question part. Then, through the Buddha's power, the Venerable Shariputra asked the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, son of noble family. So first we'll talk about the causes and conditions. The causes and conditions, it's the fourth part of the content. So the causes and conditions talks about what led to this teaching. So it starts from the line, at the time the Bhagavan entered the Samadhi, and it goes all the way to the question. All the way to natural emptiness. So causes and conditions. We're talking about a special part of a special epigraph. And this special epigraph is something that's different for all sutras. And the epigraph that we talked about yesterday, it is the same for every sutra. So it is a common epigraph. And this one that we're talking about here is the special epigraph. So I'm going to explain every part of the phrases here. At this time, it refers to the point in time when the Buddha first entered Samadhi, right before he prepares to teach the Dharma. Normally speaking, Buddhas will not just tell us about his opinion. Why then would the Buddha start to enter the Samadhi and start teaching? This is because the positive karma of all those who were present at the congregation had ripened. The Buddha noticed such a condition and knew that it was the right time to teach the Dharma. And that is why he entered and rested evenly in Samadhi. And so the next line, entered the Samadhi called profound light. This part of the sutra. Firstly, the word profound, what does it refer to? It refers to the ultimate emptiness. So Vimalamitra believed that the reason why emptiness is referred to as profound is because emptiness transcends all extremes of experience. Similarly, in the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 Lines, it is stated that profound light means emptiness. It adds, Prajna Paramita is profound, hard to see and hard to explain. From this, one can tell that the meaning of profound is that it has transcended concept and language. So it is something that's quite hard to understand. And in Vasubandhu's Dasa Bhumika Sutra, he uses terms like profound silence, profound nirvana, profound emptiness, etc. So he stated 9 different types of reasons to explain what profound means. He used 9 types of reasons to explain the profound and the causes for the profundity. Next, we go on to the part about understanding. So you've got to reflect on it. When we look at the Sanskrit says avasambodham. Avasambodham. It refers to something that you have truly seen and mastered. Next is the word samadhi. Normally, Buddha is always resting evenly in samadhi. So he wouldn't shake from, he wouldn't leave or lose the samadhi. He would stay there. He would remain in emptiness. So he doesn't need to enter into a new samadhi. However, from the eyes of the beings, the Buddha has entered a new samadhi. It's from their point of view. They think that the Buddha has entered a new samadhi, but in actual fact, the Buddha is always in samadhi. Why does the Buddha need to manifest entering such a samadhi? Because with the samadhi, he is able to enable the retinue whose main teacher was Avalokiteshvara. He enables them to understand the profound emptiness. In other words, using such a samadhi, the Buddha allows the retinue to understand his thoughts, his intention, and his world. When it comes to the Buddha's thoughts, other than himself and other Buddhas, nobody else, all other sentient beings would not be able to understand his thoughts. Even the bodhisattvas are unable to see them. But the Buddha has a special kind of blessing and is able to bless ordinary beings. In other words, these beings are able to understand what he is thinking of. Just like in Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya Vastu, it was mentioned that at that time, when the Buddha had a thought, even the smallest ants would know that thought. So that is the Buddha's power. When he has a thought, he is able to even make those insects and ants able to realize what he was thinking of. In other words, the phrase entered samadhi, called profound light, is a kind of light. It's a kind of samadhi. Then what is the meaning of samadhi? It refers to the state of concentration on an object, or a kind of focused concentration. From the words samadhi, it carries the meaning of letting the mind rest in silence. It is through the power of concentration and mindfulness that the meditator would not be distracted by external environment. So the mind is able to clearly and stably rest. So the mind can be clear and stable and rest evenly on an object. The samadhi is very important. As in Sandhi Nirmokana Sutra, it is mentioned that the samadhi is a source of all merit. in Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. So it is evident that samadhi is very important. Vasubandhu in Amidharma Kosa stated that the keeping of vows and meditation both can help us towards liberation. This means the keeping of vows and meditation. The keeping of vows can lead us to the heavenly realms. So if you want to go to the heavenly realms, you've got to keep vows. Meditation will lead you towards liberation. If you want to be liberated, you need to meditate. So this says that without samadhi, you'll not be able to escape from this desire realm, much less attain liberation. So this is very important. Next, we talked about the different types of Dharma and what it means here. Dharma. So the word Dharma is Sanskrit. So in Chinese it is Dhammo. The word Dharma in Sanskrit itself holds many different meanings, and one of them is maintaining. It refers to all phenomena. So maintaining means the maintenance of all phenomena. Why is it that phenomena maintains or remains? Because they have a kind of self-sustaining nature, and hence maintenance. So in this phrase, the word Dharma refers to the Buddha's Dharma. Usually when in Sanskrit, the word Dharma has many different meanings, but over here, we're talking about the Buddha's true Dharma. It has a special ability to maintain itself. So we've just talked about maintaining, sustaining. What does that mean? So it's, over here, it is the Buddha's Dharma has a kind of special power to remain, to be maintained. And what does this mean? So according to what Atisha had mentioned, in Lamrim, there are three kinds of motivation. So the lower kind of motivation can enable beings to remain in the human or heavenly realms without falling into the lower realms. For the motivation of people with the medium scope, it enables beings to remain in parinirvana without falling into samsara. And for the motivation of people of a higher scope, it keeps beings from falling into the two extremes of samsara and nirvana. So this is the ability of maintaining or sustaining a particular state. So this is maintaining. Usually the word maintain, so here it means all phenomena, but over here we're talking about the Buddha's Dharma, because it has a special ability of remaining, maintaining. Then we talk about the various types. So the word refers to the differences in Dharma, different types of Dharma. For example, the two truths, four noble truths, threefold training, etc. Because Dharma here refers specifically to samadhi in the true Dharma. So normally in Dharma we talk about how Dharma refers to all phenomena, but now we're talking about the true Dharma. And now over here, we're talking about samadhi. Hence, that phrase here refers to the different types of samadhi. So in that line, view the practice of profound transcendent wisdom. It is referring to a particular type of samadhi. So yesterday we thought for a long time and we're not sure what this other word means. To enter. So at this point, what it means is that the Buddha has entered and rested evenly in samadhi, and hence the word entered. And what does evenly or equally means? Equal has a very profound meaning, but I'll not talk about that first. Next is another phrase. It means not only is the Buddha concentrating on the profound emptiness, Avalokiteshvara has also entered that state. So it is not just the Buddha who has entered and rested in the profound emptiness. Avalokiteshvara has also entered that level. Then we go on to talk about the phrase at the same time. It refers to the moment that the Buddha enters samadhi, that very instance. Avalokiteshvara also started to rest evenly in the profound emptiness, and hence the phrase at that same time. Now we talk about Arya Avalokiteshvara. So this is a name that is very well known. So it's Avalokiteshvara or Guan Si Yin. So in the sutras, some have said that Avalokiteshvara and Guan Si Yin both refer to the same bodhisattva. The name Avalokiteshvara comes from his saving those who suffer and benefit others. And the other name, Guan Avalokiteshvara, comes from the bodhisattva's realization of egolessness in body and dharma, and his ability to rest naturally in analyzing emptiness. That is also to say that he's able to benefit himself as well. So on the one hand, Guan Si Yin benefits others, whereas the other name, Guan Zizai, benefits himself. So Avalokiteshvara is a Buddha who is still on the path of practice. That is, in his next life, then he will be a Buddha. However, in some sutras, it is stated that Avalokiteshvara has already attained Buddhahood in the past, and his name is Clear Dharma Tathagata. So he has already attained Buddhahood. According to Master Yuan Ce, the Avalokiteshvara who has attained Buddhahood and the one who will become a Buddha, these are two separate bodhisattvas, sharing the same name, but they are different bodhisattvas. So there was a saying that there's a different bodhisattvas, and one of them is a Korean, and he says "Annyeonghaseyo," but I don't think they would say it at that time. In other sutras, it's stated that the Avalokiteshvara who has attained Buddhahood is the real Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, and the one who has yet to attain Buddhahood is his manifestation. Manifestation is having the appearance as a bodhisattva. So it isn't the real Avalokiteshvara. It seems like it is a fake. So there is the real one behind and then a fake one in front. Of course, you can't say it this way because everything is not real. So this explanation does not differ much from the Lotus Sutra and other texts. Next, we talk about the term Mahasattva. So over here there are two words. There is Bodhisattva and Mahasattva. So yesterday we've talked about Bodhisattva, and the meaning of Mahasattva here, it means great Bodhisattva. And this refers to those who have attained the 8th Bhumi level and above. And that is when you can address them as great Bodhisattva. Next, the next line. View the practice of profound transcendent wisdom. This Arya Avalokiteshvara is very similar to the Buddha in that he also practiced and rested in the profound Prajnaparamita, and using his wisdom analyzed and saw the true nature of the 5 aggregates, and that is that true nature is emptiness. This suggests that practitioners in the later generations, if they are able to see the true nature of the 5 aggregates as being empty, then their prajna wisdom will manifest. And so we conclude the causes and conditions part. We will go on to the 5th part out of the 8 parts. And the 5th part is on the question. So over here, at that time, it says that the Buddha had entered Samadhi, and Avalokiteshvara has also entered Samadhi, and they are going to discuss emptiness. And so the word venerable in ancient India, it is a term of address in ancient India. In Tibetan, we also have many of these honorific way of, or loving way of addressing someone. So we address them as long-lived, for example, long live the king, etc. So the kings and queens, they should have 1,000 years. They should live up to 1,000 years. So it is a kind of respectful term. And over here, it is a term of loving, of love from the older generation towards the younger generation. In the text 300 verses, it is a commentary. Oh no, it is a sutra on vows. So it had said that the older generation should address the younger generation as venerable, and the younger generation will address the older generation as master. So the older generation will address the younger generation as venerable. However, the one who assembled this sutra, Ananda is not older than Shariputra. So Ananda's addressing Shariputra as venerable doesn't seem logical. So such a way of addressing someone is not that of an older generation towards a younger generation, but because Shariputra has already cut through all obscurations, and hence Ananda refers to him as venerable. So the use of this phrase is a kind of honorific term. This explanation just mentioned comes from Vimalamitra's commentary on the Heart Sutra. In that commentary, it explained why Shariputra was addressed as venerable. Next, we talk about Shariputra, who is also known as Upatissa. So in Sanskrit, it's Shariputra. Putra means child. So Shariputra's mother's name is Shari. It is also the name of a kind of bird, and it can be, the name is like a 100-tongued bird. So there are two different points of view. So the mother's name is Shari, which has the same meaning as the 100-tongued bird. There are two different sayings. The first type, it was said that his mother's eyes are very beautiful like the bird, so her name is given because of her eyes. In another saying, it is stated that when she was pregnant with Shariputra, she became very intelligent and was especially good at debates. Hence, people call her Shari, which is 100-tongued bird. Shariputra is one of the two main disciples of the Buddha. The other is Maudgalyayana. Because amongst all of Buddha's many disciples, Shariputra's wisdom is number one. So he naturally became the best person to ask a question on the profound emptiness here in the Heart Sutra. He became the best candidate because his wisdom is number one. Next, we go on to talk about the Buddha's power. So although Shariputra is number one in wisdom, the profound meaning of Mahayana is not something that the solitary hearers, the congregation, were able to understand. So when asking the question, Sariputta didn't only rely on his own power, but also the Buddha's power as well. Hence here, through the Buddha's power. Power here refers to out of the body's body, speech, mind. It is referring to the Buddha's mind. So out of the three is the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. Over here, we're referring to the Buddha's mind. So after receiving such a blessing from the Buddha, Avalokiteshvara was able to speak about the teachings that comes after. From this we can see, after receiving the Buddha's blessing, Avalokiteshvara, through a question and answer. So in the main text, we have the question and answer between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So the direct speaker in this sutra is Avalokiteshvara and not the Buddha. So it's not the Buddha who spoke these words here. However, this doesn't mean that this sutra is not the Buddha's words. So the Buddha's sutras need not necessarily come from the mouth of the Buddha. So yesterday we've talked about the Mahayana Sutras and I've explained especially the Heart Sutra from yesterday. But perhaps a problem might arise. So the issue is that in the Mahayana Sutras, are the words really from the Buddha? Many Theravadan scholars believe that the Mahayana teachings are not the words of the Buddha. And it is from Nagarjuna. So from here we can see from the Theravadan sutras as well as from history, from these two parts, we can explain. In the Theravadan Buddhism, in the early times, there were many different schools. There are two main schools. So there are the two main schools in Theravada. We have the Sarvastivada and the Mahasamgika. So it has been said that all the discipline records of what Buddha Shakyamuni told can be divided into 12 branches: sutras, poetic summaries, prophecies, discourses in verse, intentional statements, contextual accounts, testimonies of realization, historical explanations, accounts of former lives, detailed explanations, wondrous discourses, and definitive explanations. In these 12 classifications, we need to take special note of detailed explanation. Detailed explanation refers to content that is very vast and wide. At the same time, in another school of Theravada Buddhism, which is the Mahasamgika school, it divided the sutras into 9 kinds. Just now it was 12 categories. Now it is 9. So they're divided into sutras, poetic summaries, prophecies, discourses in verse, intentional statements, historical explanations, accounts of former lives, detailed explanations, wondrous discourses, and definitive explanations. So actually over here, it has also mentioned the definitive explanations. So from these information, we can see that the various schools in Theravadan Buddhism, they all believe that the Buddha Sutras has a part called detailed explanation. So what does detailed explanation mean? It refers to, in Theravadan Buddhism, there is a very important text, and it is called Abhidhamma Mahavibhasa Sastra. It is a text that is edited by 500 arhats who edited and assembled it all together. There's a total of 100 volumes. And within these volumes, they detail the 1st and 2nd century AD, the various schools of thought, and the beliefs of many great masters of that time. In this well-known text, it stated that Parsva said that the sutra Prajna is detailed explanation. So Prajna is detailed explanation is Prajna. So who is this Parsva? Parsva is a person who teaches all of those teachings. He is supposed to be Asva Ghosa's teacher. Now this venerable only became ordained when he was very old. After being ordained, he kept very strict vows. This made me think of a classic Chinese story because of the Chinese words here, "tou tou." "Tou tou" here refers to a kind of ascetic practice amongst the monks. So he never lies down to sleep. So from his armpits down, he never touched a bed. He persisted in such ascetic practice, and hence he was called Parsva. What we can see is that in the Theravada texts, the Abhidhamma Mahavivasa Shastra, it clearly states that the master of all Sarvastivada had Parsva believed that the Heart Sutra belongs to the detailed explanation category. And all of the sutras that are on discipline, the 9 categories or the 12 categories, detailed explanation belongs to one of them. So what we can see is that Theravada Buddhism themselves believe that Mahayana Sutra, the Heart Sutra, is a detailed explanation. So, in Abhayagiri Vihara's text, it also clearly talked about the 10 paramitas. And Lokottaravada, another school, listed a biography entitled Mahavastu, or Great Story, of the Buddha. Here, it also talked about the 10 Bhumi levels. And all this content is content from the Mahayanas. So Theravadan wouldn't talk about the 10 bhumis or the 10 paramitas, etc. Usually they wouldn't talk in details about this. So definitely they need some kind of a source. There are still many Mahayana and Theravada sutras that prove that there are other pieces of evidence that prove that Mahayana sutras are the words of the Buddha. And because of the limited time we have, I will not mention it. Now let's take a look at history. From modern scholars, their research and records, we know that Nagarjuna, the great master Nagarjuna, was born around the 1st century of 150 century AD. And what we know currently is that the earliest translated Mahayana Sutra is dated 179 years AD. It's translated by somebody from the Daro Shi state. So They translated the Sanskrit exalted sutra on the perfection of wisdom into Chinese. From the dates, we can be sure that the sutra had been in distribution in India for a while, and it is definitely before Nagarjuna's birth. And that is why the text was brought back to China by translators to be translated into Chinese. So the whole idea that these sutras were created or written by Nagarjuna, that's not possible. So from the evidences from the sutras, as well as from history, we can ascertain that Mahayana's philosophy and sutras are not created by Nagarjuna and the others, but rather they are the words and teachings of the Buddha. Although this is the truth, then why would Theravada logicians doubt that Mahayana sutras are actually the Buddha's words? There are two key reasons. The first is because Mahayana teachings and truths, they are very profound, and so not any ordinary Theravadan Buddhist can comprehend it. Hence, just like what was mentioned yesterday, in the collection and assembly of the sutras, the Buddha requested all the great bodhisattvas to collect all of the sutras together. This has been mentioned several times in the great treatise on the perfection of wisdom. So, this means that all the great bodhisattvas have to take part in the collection of the sutras. And it has to be the great bodhisattvas. The second reason is that because the content of Mahayana sutras is very vast, and the lifespans of beings in the human realm are very short, and their memories are also not too good. So the lifespans of the beings in the human realm are very short, and their memories aren't that good. So, in comparison, the yakshas, the dragons, and the heavenly beings, their lifespans and their memories are a lot better. Therefore, much of the Mahayana sutras were kept in those realms and not in the human realm. Therefore, the early Theravada schools weren't aware of the existence of these sutras. This seems something very logical. So for the Theravada, one of the main schools of Theravada, in their sutras, it has been mentioned that before the Buddha passed into parinirvana, he was thinking about whom should protect the sutras. And so he decided that all of the four heavenly kings and others are to protect these teachings. So in Theravada sutras, it has been said that the Buddha has passed the teachings and the sutras to the heavenly realm beings to protect. Why would Buddha request the heavenly beings to protect the sutras? He knows that the heavenly beings are always into enjoyment and wouldn't wouldn't have the discipline to practice. But if he only passes the sutras to be protected by the human realms, the human beings have very short lifespans. So he had no choice but to pass the sutras to both the heavenly realms as well as the human realm. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a very interesting view that after the passing of the Buddha into parinirvana, all of the gods and demigods got into a big argument on who should take care of the Prajnaparamita Sutra. In the end, they even started to snatch the sutra from one another's hands. It was said that the dragons got the Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra. It may be because they were smart, and the heavenly beings snatched 18,000 verses, and the 20,000 verses of Prajnaparamita, it was taken by human realms, and the 10,000 verses were taken by the Asuras. In the end, the poor Vaisravana, one of the 4 heavenly kings, only managed to pick up the last sutra left, and that is the 8,000 verses of Prajnaparamita. So this sounds kind of strange because he's supposed to be pretty powerful. Perhaps it is those who act first will get whatever they want first. So the Buddha's sutras, one saying is that his sutras can be divided into those that he spoke personally versus those who have been spoken by others. So although the Heart Sutra isn't something that is spoken directly from the mouth of the Buddha, but he has given the blessings, and the blessings, speaking through blessings, can also be divided into 3. So there is the blessings from the body, speech, and mind. So for the one of the sutras, they are spoken through the blessings, and then there are other sutras that have been spoken through the mind's blessings. So there are different types of sutras. Some of them are spoken through the Buddha's body's blessing, speech's blessings, as well as mind's blessing. There are the 3 different types. So the Heart Sutra belongs to the first type, which is the blessing through his mind. So it has been said that over 33 days, there is a heavenly realm. It will natural Dharma sounds can be heard. Perhaps the heavenly realm beings are not very capable, but naturally in that place there is natural Dharma sounds. So this is about his blessings from his mind. That is his thoughts.
No, don't open it. Just one more time. You have to. This is your.
Then there is his his mind's blessings can allow the yakshas and various beings able to speak certain mantras. So this belongs to the blessings from his mind type of sutra. Now we're done with that. Now let's talk about attaining Buddhahood. At that time, the at that same time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara So after he asked it, as for what will come next, please listen in for the next part.